We're live.
We're live. Ay, 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 ay.
Ay, 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 ay.
Ay, 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 ay,
Welcome.
ay.
Hey, that was good. That was
That's
better than,
good.
like, I want to say 90% of our guests. And not to put them down, it just, that was great.
Practice in the mirror, you guys.
There
well,
you go.
the last part of it is going to be much better. So she's going to beat the first one. Welcome to another episode of AyAyAyAi, where in the middle of the week we're very thrilled about AI machine learning, or we're not so thrilled about machine learning because there's a whole lot to do and we are exhausted from it. We are fascinated by data, but who's going to clean up the data? Well, let's say there's a lot of work to clean up those data. AI machine learning, we are here to learn more about it. What we knew yesterday about AI machine learning has already changed within the last 24 hours. So Amy is our guest of honor today, who's going to bring the flavor that even me and Lucky cannot wrap our brain around. We're just fascinated with the field of life science and biometrics, and all the things that are happening in Amy's world that we would like to just take a glimpse at it. We kind of want to get some understanding of it because Amy has written a paper on safety, security, and privacy of AI machine learning development, and that's how we came to know Amy, because her ability to contribute in that writing has been phenomenal. So, Amy, if you will, make an introduction, please.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. Really happy to talk about the effort on the privacy, safety, and security white paper for AyAyAyAi, which is a group of really amazing people across government and industry, and sometimes even academia, that are very collaborative and working toward the goal of providing frameworks for how to think about emerging technology and how to develop the kinds of thought leadership that we need in our government leaders, in our industry leaders, for thinking about not just how do we respond to issues around like ethical AI or the Internet of Things or those other kinds of emerging technologies, but also how do we get ahead of them, and how do we start putting processes in place that will allow us to build better, more ethical, more transparent technology for the future.
Wow, that's amazing. And we covered a few things prior, and there's a lot of things that I plan on learning today. It's sometimes you sit back and you want to listen, and so today I may sit back and just listen to you give us more detail about some of the experience you have. I know there's two areas specifically that I'm interested in, that you've had field study or that you're currently worked on or you've been part of. And I don't want to jump into your background, but there's specific areas that bleed over into uh, machine learning. If I can get the acronym, the actual transition right, yeah, that you can help us understand better from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like my bias, I'm a biophysicist by training, so my PhD is in molecular physiology and biophysics. And so I come to technology in general from a very biological lens. Um, so a lot of that has to do with, so from a machine learning perspective, right, you've got classes of algorithms that are often applied to specific things, right? So you've got natural language processing, you've got your computer vision type algorithms, and those break down into a bunch of subpopulations. You've got old classical algorithms, regressions, and clustering models, and a whole host of other, simpler tasks. And a lot of that stuff converges in biology with different data types, different kinds of questions. So, for example, let's see, natural language processing models can be used to analyze data like genomics. So, genomics data in general is going to be DNA sequences. So all of your cells are made, they are programmed, they are made up of DNA molecules, right? And
Hmm.
so that's a sequence of letters at the end of the day, the way that we represent it from a data perspective. And so you can use natural language processing models to address parts of predicting sequences. There's been a really huge push recently for protein sequences. So DNA makes proteins some of the
Hmm.
time, and proteins are what make the biological world go round. So there's a whole host of really big machine learning models for predicting protein structure. AlphaFold is the biggest, probably most famous one. They've been around for a hot minute, but AlphaFold has been extremely successful, and it's publicly available, I believe. So you totally play with it yourself, kind of like your dollies and your mind journey and like what else?
Mid Journey, yeah,
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 Mid
and
Journey. That's Stable
Stable
Diffusion.
Diffusion.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I played with that one myself recently.
No
Um,
way. So have I. It's
yeah,
great stuff.
what were you doing with it?
Well, I did 1.4,
Okay.
um, and I know they've released 1.5 and 2.0 like last week, but I was practicing teaching mine how to. I wanted to do a Matrix realistic version of a teddy bear fighting a cat.
Okay.
Neo versus and and versus Morpheus, and I went through probably 2,000 cycles before it finally started producing what I wanted, and it's interesting. I mean, it was great. I enjoyed it. It just is to see the AI develop for me was fantastic because typically you see things in numbers. And sorry to go off on a tangent, but to see things visually, it takes you to a different space. As a nerd, self-deprecating nerd, at the end of the day, we know we expect the outcome with our inputs and outputs, but to see something visual with color, oh man, that was fun. That
So
was a lot of fun.
they've been varying degrees of successful. Like I was trying to produce some MRI data, so brain images, and like the
Wow.
first pass ended up looking more like Cthulhu. So I
Yeah.
that was slightly less awesome.
Yeah.
But but like the more you train it, right, the better it
Yeah.
gets, and that comes down to like availability of starter images and how you tune the
Hmm.
hyperparameters and all of that stuff, which for biological data turns out to be
Wow.
basically the same problem as with any other kind of data.
Hmm.
I think
Yes.
I think as far as people that are listening, for them to understand that whatever reservation you had, or whatever was holding you back into jumping into AI machine learning with your data sets, you must not, right? You must unleash that data into all these free resources that you have. If not all your data, at least a sample of it, at least that test case, at least a little proof of concept or MVPs that you can put together using just Google TensorFlow. You just
Hmm.
have so many free resources to utilize, right? Um, Hugging Face, right? You have just troves of knowledge that you can muster and bring your data set to that knowledge and say, how does my data set work with these data set? You know,
Hmm.
data.gov. You don't have data, go to data.gov and figure out what sort of one column that you can bring from your business and insert it into data.gov information and see what happens, right? So I am so fascinated by these free tools that we have available in 2022. Where if you spoke of AI machine learning in 2012, people will ask you like, how much does it cost? I think at this point we can literally say it costs you time and your knowledge,
Hmm.
right? It's not monetary anymore. It's more about, what curiosity do you have that you want to expand? And how much time do you have to expand that curiosity? And then to say, how do I turn this into a business for profiting my bottom lines, but also to serve the communities around the world, right? Because these AI technologies are reaching far corners of the world, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what sort of data sets you have and how you put it together and what kind of magic you want to make happen, right? Um, Matrix, Neo fighting. Who's Neo fighting? Morpheus. Come
Morpheus,
on,
yes.
man, this is getting ridiculous, right? Like Dali's examples are just amazing. You know, there's just like
Yes.
people are coming up with banana on a shark and a shark on a top of the horse. It's just like all sorts of weird pictures people are coming up with. But what tells me is that these kind of free tools will give birth to so many
Hmm.
products that used to cost so much more than what AI will make it out to be, right? Marketing products like this, free images, free videos, or videos that cost close to nothing to shoot, right? You want to talk about marketing a product in a commercial? Can you create a commercial for 30 seconds using all AI videos and images? I think you can. And once you do, how much would
Hmm.
that cost you? You know, you don't have to find a location to find a person in a house and a camera, and the cameras to shoot all this commercialized product. You don't have to do all that. Just type it in, and there you go. There you have it, right? I'm just putting out that one example that I think of over and over, which is to say, how do we reduce the cost of doing business with AI machine learning? If we don't know much about AI machine learning today, we don't have to develop one. It's already out there available for you to use. Maybe you have to pay a little bit. Let's say, for example, one of the things that I look at is Document AI. Go to Microsoft 365 and rent an AI for $100 maybe. $100 will get you an amazing quality of AI that you cannot program or write a code against, right? This AI will do amazing things for you just off of PDF file. Taking information off a PDF file, sending you an email with what's in that PDF file, break that PDF file down to the ways that you need it on an email, so nobody ever have to touch a PDF file, which I'll be very happy about not touching another PDF file ever again. Uh,
Yeah, so I in general, like I agree with you, but I do think that one of the things that came out of the ActIAC effort on the privacy, safety, and security paper is that, you know, there's the old cliche of with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think that's super important here because a lot of the tools, you're right, there are lots of free tools. You can teach yourself how to code for some machine learning models with easy. If you already know how to
Hmm.
script at all, then it's a very low hanging fruit step to learn how to do machine learning with already programmed models, or go to something like Hugging Face and change a layer in a model that's already pre-trained, right? But I think the
Yes.
one of the difficult things. So I think the answer to should you is yes, and because there is a certain amount of um, like responsibility that comes with running any kind of code, whether there is machine learning in it or not. But I think the wrinkle that machine learning and particularly deep learning models adds is the complexity and the lack of transparency. You don't always know, especially if you're using a tool that's free online where the actual code is completely obfuscated. You have no idea what's happening in the layers, and you won't have any idea what's happening in the deep layers even if you are a competent programmer yourself. That's how it works, right? The hidden layers are actually, in fact, hidden most of the time. And so you can't just troll through and figure out what's happening, even if you could. A layperson playing around with something on the internet definitely is not figuring out what all the transformations are that are happening in that data. So anytime you want to broaden your horizons, you want to learn something new, you want to figure out, what everybody's talking about with this AI, machine learning, deep learning stuff, I am 100% in favor, with the caveat that the data that you bring to it, you should be comfortable being made available to whoever it is that made or owns that model, and whatever the small print is that goes with it that you didn't read.
Yeah, I completely agree. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. And taking responsibility for code is important. You know what what you're developing, and at the end you're going to have to learn. It's going to take time. Before you start to understand what you're, because these models, like you said, they're already out there. If you want to put together some kind of forecasting model, they're there. If you want to some kind of machine learning model, against some data. You can take it and put it together, like you said, with little time and effort of understanding of scripting. You can sit there and you can put together something, but at the end, what is the real benefit? Are you learning, or are you giving somebody a real benefit of good data? At the end, you did mention a few things, that lead me to what privacy is, and we covered this prior. What is a responsible AI? What is privacy? Because from my perspective, I'm a cyber guy in the U.S. in America. Privacy is almost like an afterthought, and our data, in some cases, is up to for sale to the highest bidder or the lowest bidder, depending on how recent or how current the data is. And so privacy, is a big concern when it comes to AI. Who's going to be the responsible party? How do we identify what's the actual, what's the middle ground where we say, okay, this here, as far as being responsible, taking the bull by the horns, making sure that security is applied, making sure the data set is protected, and what is the outcome of the AI at the end? What are we producing, and who is seeing this data? There's a lot of concerns that I have with AI growing, and I know that I sometimes I tend to be pessimistic, but I'm a pessimistic optimist. I want to see AI grow, but I do want to make sure that as it grows, that we're being responsible for the technology. Just like you said, privacy is huge. How do you see? I think what was the main concern that you identified with AI and privacy that kind of jumped out to you initially?
So I think one of the things that we discovered working on the privacy part of the paper is just how many places, like how pervasive the question of privacy is, because it's basically your entire life is available on the internet somewhere, right? And not just the internet. You're walking down the street, there are street cameras recording things, and maybe they're recording things for totally good reasons, but who has access to that data, right? And who has, like, what kinds of machine learning models have access to that data? So one of the things that we did when we were putting together the paper is we typically write these things from the perspective of informing leadership about how to put together frameworks and guardrails, and what do we need to be thinking about to get ahead of the problem instead of being so reactionary all the time. But we discovered, like, there are lots of places that we are not thinking about privacy that we should be. And that's setting up a bunch of possible reactionary issues later. And so one of them was devices, right? With the Internet of Things being deployed in all kinds of hardware all over the place, you have no idea most of the time where your voice might be being recorded. So that's one major angle, is voice recordings. We don't have a whole lot of regulation in some places around when and what you're allowed to record, what kinds of disclaimers are required, what kind of consent is required for your voice or your image or your posture or your gait to be recorded. So you can imagine a future where, I mean, this is already happening. So even in some of my research, I was looking at modeling fruit fly posture, right? Okay, I'm a biologist, I study fruit flies. Okay, so we're talking about like a pupil fruit fly, but even still, I'm able to use computer vision models to track some of the posture changes while the animal is moving. And you can imagine, if you watch somebody walk down the street, you as a person are going to recognize a lot of your acquaintances walking down the street because you know how they move, right?
Oh,
And so
goodness.
that's something that we're totally not really thinking about, all the places where devices are creating data that might be available. And so we don't want to necessarily like get all paranoid and close all that off, but we do want to help the people who are in the videos, so that's any citizen walking down the street, the people who are curating that information, who are controlling that information, who are responsible for the security and leadership, to start thinking about, where do we need to be paying attention that we aren't?
I think in a discussion of, you have that formulation time, right? Your ideation of what it is that you would like to engage when you want to develop a machine learning model. You have to spend time in designing, time in development, and time in deploying it, but not all equally, right? I think there's an emphasis that needs to happen in designing phase, where before you develop, you have not if not everything on your checklist, most of the things in your checklist checked off to say now we are
Mhm.
comfortable with our due diligence to get into development. And the reasoning behind it is that right now, as we stand, I think the research number shows that 83% of developed artificial intelligence and machine learning models does not go into deployment. And even the 17% that is being deployed, those 17% does not perform to the level that we anticipate the machine learning model should perform it, right? It's because, if I may, because they don't do the breakdown of why the 83% doesn't go into deployment, is because once they started development, they did not really emphasize what needs to go into the designing. And I believe people that are in the room, people that participate in that design phase, they were overconfident, if not underconfident, overconfident about the fact that they had their due diligence right. Because what happens during development phase is that you come up with whole sorts of scenarios that, of course, you did not see in a design phase. You never will, because that's why you do development testing and validation. And in testing and validation, you're able to come up with scenarios that, of course, you cannot come up with a design phase. However, in design phase, these are the type of conversations that you need to have: is that safety, the security, and the privacy. Who would most likely not want to be recorded, right? So if you develop somebody's ability to walk and capture what sort of a body, I guess I don't know the right word for it, but like you said, movement intelligence, right? From the movement intelligence, what sort of intelligence can you gather, right? From just by seeing somebody walk. And when I was in the school, Columbia University had a test that people would go and participate in, which they will walk on a treadmill. And just from that walk in the treadmill, they're able to give away all sorts of details about conditions in my whole body, right? Just the way I walk, just the way my ankle rolls,
Yeah.
just the way my whole body is responding to every step I take. So who would want to participate in that? Who would want to give away consent to have that done, right? Who would be a beneficial to that, beneficiary to that? And who would, on the other side, say, hey, there's a lawsuit pending, and I'm bringing it to the table, right? So designing is the total cake at any point, in my opinion, because we talk about continuous integration and continuous development once you deploy it. I think continuous designing is the third part of CD. Instead of continuous development, it's continuous designing. And continuous design, in my head, is to say we capture that due diligence, right? When it comes to that due diligence, we are able to mention that due diligence in time of lawsuit, time of shutting down the project if we have to. Why we shut down the project that costed us millions of dollars? Well, here's why: because our due diligence either lacked it, or our due diligence said just shut it down, because that's not what we as a company with ethics and our principles will want to be aligned with that machine learning model. Continuous integration, however, can help with that, right? First, you get a few data models that you brought in that was problematic, but now you're expanding as you're designing continuously. You're expanding that data set in order to include into the data models, machine learning models, so that way you are able to do more, have more done, and meet more of that due diligence that is required of you, right? Healthcare industry, not even going to touch it. Just a simple basic manufacturing will tell you a lot about how your design that you start on version 1 could drastically increase in size by the time of version 2, version 3, and version 4, right? Manufacturing, just off of a camera, you can do so much AI. But in manufacturing, you have tires, you have wheels, the transport trucks that are bringing in the goods, and capturing all sorts of data points to create a total data fabric for yourself. Will change over time, right? Those are the machine learning models. That's what they're supposed to do. You have continuous integration in order to continuously develop what it is that you start off with. So if your version 1 only had a camera, by version 3 and 4, you're including tire pressure into that camera for some reason. I can tell you why, but I don't have to draw out a picture here. But the cameras can do a whole lot in version 1, but over time that camera will be a single device that will have multiple other devices providing the data sets into that version 1 of machine learning. So it's very important that these are scenarios that we can capture very well right off the gate. But safety, privacy, and security is something that we still kind of lack as a developers, right? We have the developer mentality. As we design, we want to get to the development quick, right? It's kind of like, I don't want to be in the training forever. I want to actually do real stuff, like develop, right? So I think it matters who's in the table, who's in the room, bringing that discussion forward, right? Like somebody like Amy would be that. I guess we call it a gatekeeper, right? Gatekeeper of like, look, privacy means privacy. When privacy is at point, we got to talk about it with high due diligence and record that conversation, record that due diligence that we have put in an effort, and we're writing down why this was brought up, but this is not a main concern. What are the thought process behind that due diligence? We have to have that baked into our design time, right? We have to have that baked into cybersecurity. Like, Lucky will come in and say, yeah, guys, look, it's all binaries, bro. We got to discuss it from cybersecurity perspective. Who can poison that data set and ruin our deployed AI model, right? Who can poison it, and how can they poison it, and why should they poison it? What are their motivation and incentives? How do we remove those incentives and motivation, right? And somebody like me will come in and say, well, safety, right? Safety, security, privacy are all baked into design. Is a design process that is well thought out, well captured, and very good for future deployment, I would say, because that could turn your project sideways if you're not designing well and designing with due diligence.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that was a main conclusion was that we need to start with a privacy by design approach, especially for anything that has data that could be used to identify another individual, or that might help sort of reverse engineer the data source if you need to obfuscate it, if it's like public health data, for example, or something like that. So there are a lot of cases where it's going to be like super important to start out the gate with a privacy by design approach. But then at the end of the day, you're right, continuous integration, continuous development, and continuous design are going to be crucial, because in reality, in a big organization, by the time you get through, design, and then you put it through development, and then you put it through QA testing, and you actually launch or, ship it, then your privacy by design approach is totally outdated, right? Because the guys on the other end that are looking to get that data are probably moving a little bit faster, right? So there's, when we talk about, I love that we use the term agile for tech, because it describes the idea of parallelizing, some of that work, but it's not actually that flexible, right? So the synonym for agile is not like, it's not very flexible. You can't turn on a hair, right? If by the time you get halfway through development, you're partway through a sprint, you realize, crap, this design is already hosed. It's not very easy to turn that ship around, especially for a larger product. And so, the only mitigation for that, it, like with everything else, is to do the best you can, constantly be benchmarking, constantly be identifying new benchmarks. Because the other thing that we don't want to do is have our testing setup get stale, right? And so that was one of the things that that came out of our privacy, security, and safety sort of melding between the three groups, was where are the places that we have to start considering overlapping issues. And the design layer of producing a new model architecture is one of the places where we had significant overlap in needs between the privacy, safety, and security arms of that topic. And the other thing, like the only other thing that I thought was really interesting that we learned from that was, identifying the stakeholders. Because one of the things that we don't do is include everybody in a conversation about artificial intelligence. We've got all of these hilarious conspiracy theories and, lots of, Skynet. I mean, it's all over science fiction, and every Minority Report scare the hell out of people. Language. And so, there's a whole lot of places where it's easy to latch on to something that is fantastical, because you don't know any better. And so we have a responsibility to be educating while we are working on, making better systems. We also need to be educating everybody and making things as transparent as possible.
I think that when you mentioned conspiracy, like I want to draw a picture to people about what we think is possible and what's the layers of impossible that happens before that possible actually comes to the surface. Is a lot, right? So back in when we went to the moon, people discussed the fact that we have so much hardware, all we will do is travel to the moon and create a moon base and travel beyond moon, and all these imagination for 70 some years they held on to, right? What actually happened, right? 70 years later, we stopped shooting rockets at the moon. We stopped sending people even to the space. Like the United States literally said 2014, it costs too much. We're not going up there anymore, right? Until just recently, they brought that program back. We said, we have to invest because the satellites are going up there. But whatever the case was in 1960, when they saw the rocket launching towards the moon, our imagination went total hardware, right? Everything hardware based. Cars that are going to fly. Back to the movie called Back to the Future, right? That's what they talked about in 2015. They're going to have lots of fax machines and lots of cars, and cars are going to fly, and the fax machine will be on the beach.
Oh gosh.
But what happened? The opposite has happened. The opposite is that we have this device that can connect us through worldwide at a fast speed, and there's going to be about 3 billion of those iPhones all around the world, and the smartphones. And these smartphones will be able to provide us with all sorts of functions, not just one, right? Taking pictures to sending that pictures worldwide is instantaneously, right? But on the other side, we never ended up in the moon. So when people are going through that doubts and conspiracy theories and all these, like what's going to happen in the future and should we keep AI contained or whatnot, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. The future that we're predicting with AI machine learning, look, I'll be the first one to mention that I might be wrong, right? I might be wrong. This AI machine learning might not work out for us. But there's a higher chance of this AI machine learning working out than anything else, right? Because like we said, hardware is really hard to get a hold of. Versus software, we figured it out that software is much easier to deal with. As long as you have a semiconductor chips and some capabilities of doing machine learning locally and capturing those data using the semiconductor chips. If I'm wrong on that, I guess I'll have to be reborn in 50 years and slap myself in the back of my head. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is because when you capture an imagination, it matters who's in the room capturing that imagination. So as you're designing, you have to have human in the loop that, Amy can bring to the table, Lucky can bring to the table, I can bring to the table. But if just 3 of us bring that to the table, that's a bubble that is going to be as bad as the movie Back to the Future, right? Back to the Future Part 2, where, the guy traveled into the future and was traveling on a flying car, right? Get it, cool. But it didn't happen because the bubble that they were inside, the imaginations that they had, was limited to the possibilities, right? I think it happens in natural order, like as in we cannot have enough opinion and feedback in order to capture what could be in the future, what could be possible. But we just try and go through the trials and errors and we do it right. So in the design phase, it's very important that we design not the topic that is most viable because we can sell the product, but to try and fail, but at least keep the door open for version 2, version 3, version 4, reiterate those versions. So even if you use Agile, which, look, I'm not a big fan of Agile, but at the same time, Agile has that preparation to say like, look, you might create something, but we might take 75% away, keep 25% and rebuild on that 25%. Right? We might keep doing that until we get to a satisfiable product. I mean, excuse me, not satisfiable, but like a product that meets the standard, a product that meets our privacy requirement, our safety requirement, our security requirement, right? So we do DevOps all the time. Now it's time for DevSecOps because we realize that, hey, DevOps in Agile is great, but once it goes to production, somebody comes in and hacks it. Well, let's start doing DevSecOps, right? So right now we do ML ops. We might start doing ML sec privacy safety ops. bring all this into the machine learning and include those pieces into the machine learning. But by the way, I just want to throw out another book, another book, but a movie, which is The Martian, right?
Oh yeah.
The team that has done the movie. Wait, am I saying the movie named Martian right? With
Yeah.
Matt Damon, right? It's Martian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That movie, the writer, the director, and the team of people that have written that movie with the speculative like details, the details that are so amazing was in that movie. They got it all right, like 99% of the time, because that's how much detail they put in, the effort they put into writing that movie, the script of that movie. So there's a big difference between when you write Back to the Future versus a movie, a book or a movie like Martian. You have to get the details right, and people appreciate the truth, right?
Mhm.
Even if it's not fantastical, you can always create a bare bone skeleton tool, and people will still appreciate that because the possibility of building on that failed product is a lot, right? As in, you have to give yourself the room to fail and continue building. I'm just gonna stop right there. It's a long rant.
Yeah. So two follow-ups. One, the book was better. The movie was excellent, but the book by Andy Weir was actually even
Right.
more detailed and even more amazing.
That's
Um,
right.
but also, like, I think what you're hitting on is one of the things that was super important to me during the white paper with AyAyAyAi, which is the whole idea of crowdsourcing for writing that white paper. Right, that was a crowdsourced project where we brought in people with different perspectives and different expertise from all over, government and industry, and a couple of stray academics. We parceled it out, we did the research, we spent, like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 sessions, and we're talking about hour-long sessions here, like just working on definitions, right? Just definitions, because getting
Mhm.
alignment on what the heck these words even mean is
Yeah.
kind of a critical foundation for having any kind of discussion. And then we pounded out, our assigned writing sections, and then we sent it out for review, right, by other experts that other than us, to get out of that echo chamber. And so while this is not a terribly practical approach in terms of speed, what it does do is invite other perspectives into the room, so that you're not only like using your traditional edge case identification, right, but you're also bringing in the naive viewer, if you will, has
Mhm.
sometimes the best perspective, the best questions, because you're like, holy crap, I didn't think about that.
Or you don't want to think about it because you don't want to answer the question. You're like, I don't want to go down there until someone says, "All right, let's shine a light on it."
Plus one, yeah.
Exactly. And you bring up a lot of good points between the two of you, and I'm kind of, the area that I'm kind of honing in on for me and stepping back, because they're all great points. Yeah, you guys are all solid, but the privacy part that concerns me
Yeah.
is we're so used to living a certain way, and all of a sudden they say, "Hey guys, we're going to change the way we do business."
Yeah.
The culture, it's going to take time for the culture to change. And so that being said, you know, what are the teeth? And I hate to say the teeth, but what it's going to it's going to take something for people to change the way they do business, and there's got to be teeth within the policy that's being developed for AI. Otherwise, you know, just a fine or, a little slap on the wrist, it's just going to be hard to say what are the teeth. They're going to point people and say, okay, you're no longer going to do what you do or continue down that road. You're going to do things right. And it's hard to change the culture, is all I'm saying. In the US, in this area, the way we handle privacy and the way we should handle privacy are two different stories. And I would love to see it change. It's just that there's got to be something there with teeth. And if it's just the fact that if you're doing the right thing for the right reasons and you're going to do your due diligence, and that's a story that we would all like to believe everyone does. But at the end of the day, dollars and cents speak more to people in business, and they're going to take the shortcuts. They're going to do what they have to do. And so I look forward to privacy having some teeth. I just don't know how that's going to look.
Yeah.
Does
So
that make sense?
A couple things
Yeah.
on that. So, like for one thing, even privacy doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone,
Hmm.
right? So we're starting to see some
That's
generational
right.
differences where like digital natives, kids that grew up, like spent their entire lives in the Twitter sphere and on the Facebooks and whatever else.
Hmm.
I'm too old for any of that stuff, I'm afraid. But there's a very different perspective on how much privacy is needed, right? And so the convenience of
Hmm.
having instant access to your friends, your boss, whatever it is that's on the web, that is more important to you in your daily life than the loss of that information about you. And the other thing
That's
that I
Yeah.
think is important is to bring up the privilege card, right? Because if I'm trying to run a small business and I need Facebook for that business, right? It
right.
almost doesn't matter. Then it becomes a question of my bottom line and my economics. Like it doesn't matter if I don't want the Facebooks to have access to all my
Exactly.
data. I
That's right.
need that for my business to be successful. And so I think, the what is it, the teeter totter back and forth between my personal incentives for keeping my data private versus my personal incentives for the benefit of whatever the service is, like those are constantly at odds right now. And that's a place where I think we need more information, we need more education, we
Hmm.
need more clarity. And if there's going to be any teeth, then we need to start thinking about how do we put that in place. There was a
Yeah.
book I read maybe a couple of years ago. I think it was called Habeas Data. That's at least part of the title. And it was an extremely exhaustive book about a lot of the legal arm of privacy and where it does and doesn't provide any kind of assistance. There were a bunch of really in-depth case studies and all that, and I highly recommend reading it to get a historical view on, like, even up to the Supreme Court, what has been
Hmm.
reviewed from a privacy perspective and what hasn't.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
if I may, give it a shot, right? I want to bring up 2 points, right? One is historical, and one is just about how the nature of the world is, right? One is, look, it's honest word from me. Millions of people have to die in order for me to be here today, right?
Hmm.
Millions of people have to die in order for me to be here. I had about 4,000 grandparents that had to come together in order for me to come alive 400 years later. So what I'm trying to say, in the last 400 years, we had about 4,000 grandparents, right? A lot of people's privacy gets breached for me to have all the luxuries in communications and technologies that I have today. A lot of people's privacy got thrown out the window, right? It happened. But going forward, we have other options that we can have, right? Other options such as how do we make it okay that somebody's privacy gets broken? Well, that's not a good statement. Nobody wants to hear that. But what happens is that synthetic data could create what we have done previously, which is a violation of people's trust, actually, and synthetic data to create the similar sort of data without having those privacy being violated, right? Not anymore. Going forward in the future, we can capture the similar data, but include new state of data that does not violate people's privacy, but what's done has already been done, but we have lots of understanding about our nature. And one of our nature, which is the second point, is that our nature trusts a group of people coming together to do something, and we trust that more because we find accountability in the gathering of let's say hundreds of people versus two people in a closed door behind a closed door having to do something that we have to be the users of, or we have to be the beneficiary of, because we don't know the conspiracy between two people. But when it's a gathering of like hundreds of people, we have some sort of sense in ourselves to say, like, I trust this more than I trust these two individuals doing the work behind the closed doors, right? And just to be in a nature side of things, like, more people go to man-made creation like Times Square in New York City versus they go to somewhere in nature, right? Nature
Hmm.
is not as well visited like it is in something of the man-made created tourist destinations, right? And so people go to Egypt, people go to Paris, people go to New York City because they want to see those man-made creation that they don't know the numbers of people that put in their blood and sweat into developing those, but they have this sense that are like, where the people are, that's where I want to be. right? So when we see the success of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and all these big giant corporations that are somehow associated with privacy violations, they are the one that we gravitates towards. That small startup that says like, I got all the things that you need, but you will never find out whose privacy I violated to give you that technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, say for example, we can talk about TikTok, all these other social media platforms that probably does violate a lot of people's privacy in order to give you that technology, give you that entertainment. So I think I made my 2 points here, but the point of it is to understand our psychology behind it, right? Our psychology is just that. If we have a massive amount of people working on something together, we'd rather trust that than to trust something that is obscure behind the door, that we don't know really much about who's being accounted for, who's accountable for all this technology that's coming out of that room, right? So privacy is a delicate issue. It will not get solved overnight. But one thing we can do is, bring that privacy awareness to the people so they can get involved in this privacy issues. They can voice their opinion and feedback on this privacy issue. But first, they have to have the literacy on how AI machine learning is developed, right? Just like Amy said earlier. I don't want to talk about it outside this room because somebody might listen it, or somebody might take my idea, or somebody might steal it, or something along the line of AI machine learning is just grimy evil, right? Well, it's not. It's just dirty old data that's cleaning itself and then all of a sudden presenting itself in a new outfit, right? That's all it is. It's still all data on the background. You can call it all the technology you want, right? Behind the hardware is just a bunch of dirty data that's working through an algorithm and providing you with a good source of whatever services you're requiring.
Yes, but providing who?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's the crux of it, right?
Right. That's another crux of it. That's another side of the spectrum.
that's part of. I mean, that's why you can't it makes less sense to consider any of privacy, safety, or security in a complete vacuum, because all of those overlap, and they overlap in the context of both the economics of the situation and the benefit to the model, right? A model itself is data hungry, right? It's gonna take in everything it can to make itself better, because that's how we wrote it, right? So any data that is relevant, it will crunch and make itself better. And since we have little to no understanding for deep learning models, especially of what's happening in those hidden layers, it's very difficult to control. So the only thing that we can really do to mitigate that right now, there are a lot of good works being done on building more transparent types of models. However, for a lot of the ones that we're working with right now, like, what you got to do is you got to gatekeep the data that goes in, because once it gets into the model, forget it, right?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Whole lot of work, huh?
Yeah. On that depressing note.
AyAyAyai.
AyAyAyai.
What's that? One of our other guys saying with AyAyAyai.
A nice dirge. AyAyAi.
There you go.
There you go, Amy. I knew it was gonna be different than the first one. But with that, Amy, thank you so much for shining so many lights on these topics, because look, it only makes sense that you do it versus somebody who has a faint idea about it, right? You are the pro at these topics because you live and breathe it on a daily basis. We're just the audience to see, your work shine through your paper, which we, of course, going to publish with the link in the podcast here. And people should be able to read it and get some sense of urgency why this is important, and go back to thinking about why 83% of developed AI machine learning model does not deploy. And you can ask Google, because Google has thousands of failed product that has never gone into production because of something similar to these questions and concerns that we're bringing to the surface right now. So Amy, thank you so much. Really want to thank you for taking your time on a
Hmm.
Wednesday afternoon to join us, or Wednesday evening to join us. Um, so, Amy, I will give you the departing thought, and then after that, Lucky, your departing thought, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, this was my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, and check out the paper. It was a really incredible bit of work from a bunch of really smart and really dedicated people that are trying to help make AI more accessible and make the world a better place with it.
Well, I'll keep it short, Amy. Thank you so much. I've learned so much today, and thank you for everything that you're doing. And it's great to have people like you in the industry. Uh, and thank you again for being our guest today. It's been an honor.
Ay, 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 ay.